Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for a design subcommittee meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. Today is Tuesday, May 21st, 2024. The BPDA is continuing to host public meetings in a virtual setting for the health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. I'm Christina Rico, Executive Director of the Boston Civic Design Commission. Before we proceed with the agenda, the open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Therefore, please be aware that the Commission staff is making an audio and video recording of this meeting. Please turn off your camera and microphone if you do not wish to be recorded. For the purposes of the record, today we are joined by Commissioners Eastley, Evans, Kim, Kotaridis, Ron, and Solano, and Commissioner Diana Fernandez. We are also expecting at some point Commissioner Morris, and I will notify folks when she has joined. Tonight's meeting proceedings will follow the typical BCDC Design Subcommittee meeting format, beginning with a brief presentation from the proponent teams, followed by comments from BCDC commissioners, followed by public testimony. A reminder to the proponent teams that presentations will be limited to 10 minutes, and I will give presenters 2-minute warnings. With that, and unless we have any questions or comments from the commissioners, I'm going to go ahead and elevate the first proponent team to get started on their presentation. 1 moment, please. Gautam, I have elevated you to co-host. Are you able to share your screen and begin your presentation?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
Thank
I will
you.
work to elevate all the other members of your team while you get your presentation started.
And can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Excellent. So Christina, should I just get started in the meantime?
Yes, just the quick preamble here is that the first presentation, this will be the Wentworth Institute of Technology Institutional Master Plan. This will be the first presentation of the proposed project to the Design Subcommittee following an introduction at the June 27th, 2023 monthly meeting. It's my understanding that there are no commissioners present at this time to intend to recuse themselves from deliberations. Is this correct? I'm seeing folks nodding in affirmation. Excellent. Thank you. With that, I invite the proponent team to begin presenting whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Christina. And thank you for this opportunity to present and share with you updates on our overall Wentworth Institutional Master Plan. My name is Gautam Sundaram. I've been working with the client and the broader consultant team in leading the master plan. And we met about a year ago with some of you, and I'm highlighting here is some of the feedback that we had received from the BCDC and the commissioners with the plan next to it to sort of as a little bit of a reminder. While I won't go through many of the details that was shared, but I've highlighted some key words in bold. We want to share with you how we have adapted and refined and advanced our overall master plan response to a lot of the comments that we've received. We have been very busy since we met last in June, and a lot of that focus has been in understanding and really evolving the thinking around how do we start to really focus on the experience and the ground level transformation, in addition to many of these planning items that were highlighted to us. Thinking about the broader open space framework, how do we really create a sense of place from a programming standpoint, looking at the pavilion location that's been highlighted in circle. There's a lot of discussion on that. Also looking at the connectivity and reimagining of the pike as well, in addition to looking at aspects about the residential tower and the height. There's also a comment made about the overall open space reading a little bit more grid-like. And so with a lot of those comments we took to heart, we really wanted to focus more, as I mentioned earlier on how do we start to really advance the thinking around the experience. Here is an aerial view of the Wentworth campus today and highlighting the overall ownership of the Wentworth institution with the dashed boundary as well. As you can see, the street grid really plays a significant role in how it bifurcates sometimes certain campus locations. So how do we start to really think about the connectivity has been a big part of it. How do we really pedestrianize and transform many of the areas dedicated to parking and other areas of transformation? And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. And so sort of transforming from that overall aerial view to this ground plane site plan itself. This shows you the overall campus today, and also highlighting how some of those land uses are organized. As you can see in the beige, a lot of the residential development is organized towards the left across either side of Huntington Avenue, with highlighted in the lighter blue, purplish color is a lot of the academic buildings. And then in the cyan and the magenta is the athletics and recreation and some student life buildings as well. We have a significant open space on the front along Ruggles Street and also a green space on the quad. What's highlighted in the dash red are going to be significant areas of transformation. While we do have other improvements as well, want to highlight some of the key aspects that we are looking at as part of really reimagining the campus itself. One of them has been the redevelopment of the annex site by completely removing the existing annex buildings and redeveloping that, removing some of the 1 to 2 story academic buildings, and then also transforming the parking lot, which is also known as the West Lot, into a new residential and academic community. And then the replacement of Edwards Rogers, which is this residential building right now, and then also the replacement of Baker Hall. So those are some of the significant areas of transformation. But the key aspect of this plan has been really about that open space framework. It's about how do we really start to connect to what this place makes it so unique as we're organized by many of the neighborhoods that surround us, but also its amazing location. How do we really connect that open space framework from the Fens to the Evansway Park and really make our open space framework as a part of that story and that experience as it connects all the way out towards the Southwest Corridor. And so really intentionally thinking about what those green spaces are, creating a diversity of those types of green spaces. And what we're trying to highlight here is that this is not just about the student community or the Wentworth community. This is about the much broader community of engaging them and creating a series of diverse types of scaled spaces, but also diverse types of ways we program some of these spaces. Some are passive recreation, to some are larger gathering spaces, to a more park-like space, to a smaller social space, to a community garden scale space as well. So really thinking about the broader experience coming from the Fens all the way through our campus has been a key part of how we think about the scales and the types of spaces and making that interconnected. Similarly, then you overlay that with a circulation pattern. And that circulation pattern to be one that's really about not just creating direct connections, but a fluidity in experiences as well, creating those smaller moments of pause, whether you're in an indoor space or in an outdoor space. And so how do you start to really create that circulation pattern that connects to the broader context and let that open space framework and that circulation pattern start to drive by putting the landscape in the forefront to what this overall master plan wants to be. And so that has led us to the overall master plan. In the principles, it has been very consistent with what we shared with you before, but with a lot of differences about how the overall ground plane has evolved, with really a significant open space called the Commons in the front with a new pavilion. By relocating what was previously discussed as the pavilion, the corner of Ruggles and Huntington, it's now going to be a gateway and a welcome center to the Wentworth campus itself. And then starting to really create a series of open spaces when you think about it, from the Fens, the Evansway Park, to the Triangle Park, and then creating new smaller spaces like the Grove, which are now framed by a new residential building on either side, an academic building, then really reimagining the quad itself as that heart of that campus, and then connecting all the way across Parker Street into what could be a new green space with a series of other garden spaces that are now transformed by the redevelopment of the annex site as well. And the best way I could sort of describe this in 5 minutes would be to really walk you through what that ground plane experience has been. And that has been a significant focus of this past year for us in engaging with the community. So I want to share with you what that experience is from 3 very important thresholds. And I'll start with the front lawn. at that intersection of Huntington and Ruggles. And so when we look at the experience today, it's a very civic lawn that is much more of a visual element that is separated by an overgrown hedge with narrow walkways with the direct pathways leading to Wentworth Hall itself, and transforming that to be much more of a park for the community, the neighborhood, that is unlike what we have today. A park that is also has celebrates and brings in a lot more ecological biodiversity and creates a buffer between what is a vehicular street along Ruggles and what would be a programmable space, whether it's during the daytime and weekdays, but then also during the night weekends, where it could be programmed for many uses for the community as well. Widening sidewalks with the removal of many of those hedges, really completely transforming this to be a much more of a usable and programmable park as well, and one that really promotes urban biodiversity as well. As we continue to walk closer towards Wentworth Hall, here you can see one of the key challenges has been for us is the inaccessibility of the building itself. And so taking an impediment and transforming that by creating a new gateway to the campus, a place that really becomes a visitor center, a welcome center that opens up the campus and really starts to make it a place of science on display and really celebrates the great work that many of our students do. And by not only making it accessible, it really starts to become this gallery space that celebrates the work that our students do, but also is a great way to also showcase and really bring our visitors and our community through this journey of classrooms and open spaces and gallery spaces, and bring you from that front lawn all the way through accessible walkways into the heart of the campus, which is the quad. And so that's the quad as it stands today. That's BD Hall, an existing building. And then here are the lower 1 to 2 story buildings I was talking about before. And a key focus of this has been, while this is a great lawn that everybody appreciates, is to transform the way we think about the edges and defining that. And so a new academic building, very similar in character to this existing CES building, is that's to my left, is having maker spaces at the ground floor with student co-working spaces and lounge spaces and other meeting spaces at the upper level, with a cascading set of stairs as a way to also define and activate the edges and activate our overall quad as well. And then as you move through through the Grove, and you look at the next second very important threshold, which is if you're coming from the Fens or the Evansway Park and crossing Huntington Avenue, this is your current view right now. And so transforming that to be much more of a pedestrian-friendly view, where you're having a wider amenity zone lined with trees and lights, a wider sidewalk, and then getting rid of the piers and the fences and really opening up those green spaces to really create one comprehensive green space that really could be programmed and also serve many different types of activities, and also is a much more vibrant and addition along Huntington Avenue as a civic space. And as I make my way through what's currently known as the Treehouse building, walking what has also been called as the Pike, and so you can see that narrow sidewalk beyond, that's the current view. And we want to transform that by really making that a much wider sidewalk, but that's also lined with planting on either side that completely opens up this connection that's in the east-west direction, and a very strong pedestrian connection, if you will, that really brings us all the way through into the core of the campus, but then also allows you to walk all the way out to the southwest corridor as well. And so a parking lot, which is called as the West Hall right now, that is the major primary use. And here you can see that narrow walkway that is separated between the parking lot and the MWRA site is now transformed into this wide pedestrian promenade, but then also is shaped and spatially defined by this residential building, and creates a new green space where the parking lot exists right now, which we've called as the Grove. And so this allows us to have a lot of active uses at the ground floor, but also allows that fluidity of circulation with mural walls screening the MWRA site as well, and creating covered and semi-covered spaces as well. And then the parking lot itself is now transformed into a new green space, which we've called the Grove, that is now framed by many of these residential buildings with active ground floor uses, and also the academic building as well. And not only being a space for the Wentworth community during the daytime, but really thinking about this to be a much more of a passive space, more about social and smaller group gatherings under a canopy of trees to really create that shaded environment, but during the nighttime also starts to become a space for the community as you start to bring in pedestrians off of Huntington Avenue to really engage into what could be this very vibrant and a sculptural space as well that brings art and many other elements of ways the way the space could be programmed and used during the weekends. And then as I continue to walk along the
Just a
pike,
heads up, Gautam. That was 10 minutes, but please take your time to wrap up your presentation.
okay, thank you, Christina. As I continue to walk along the pike, this is at Parker Street, which is currently a place that many of the students have highlighted as a place of safety concern too. How do we start to pedestrianize? But then also you see annex, the one building which is inaccessible. And so really pedestrianizing by creating a flush paved condition and then taking away the annex building and then replacing that with a new green space that becomes a space for outdoor learning and outdoor events as well, but becomes a place that is now framed by many of the academic buildings as well. This also allows us to continue to have this strong pedestrian connection, making its way through these green spaces towards the southwest corridor. And finally, in conclusion, is sort of this is the view looking back from the Annunciation Road from Alice Taylor Housing. A lot of we see is the backs of building service and many of the sidewalks that Dave has had with the community members is transforming that view into what's no longer a back of a building, but a new garden space itself that is now framed by active buildings on both sides and a garden space that could be programmed for seating and other ways the way the community could use it, and then also continue to be part of a larger framework too. So this is an existing view, sort of looking back from an aerial view, looking back from the Alice Taylor housing side, which now gets transformed into a series of these open spaces that really make its connection all the way from the fence towards the southwest corridor. And the pike is now transformed as not just about a singular idea of a walkway, but really transformed into an idea of multiple open spaces of diverse scale as well. Really starting to change the way we think about land uses, no longer organizing them by primary uses, but really activating the ground floor as much as possible. And so here's showing you how we have more student life and active spaces at the ground floors of many of these buildings, highlighting the new pavilion, which is a major visitor center and a gateway into the campus. And then ultimately sort of showing this in the overall massing as well. One key aspect that was highlighted about the height of the residential building is that we have made sure that we're exceeding the Avenue of the Arts guidelines, and there's no longer a shadow cast at the Emerald Necklace for any moment of time in the entire year. So we've taken down the height of the residential tower as well. But here, this aerial view starts to show you the overall composition of open spaces. And finally, I want to close on this side on the impact of what we believe this master plan really reinforces the legacy of the city of Boston, but also how it could be a great aspect and the addition in really connecting the overall Emerald Necklace. And with that, thank you for your time. And thank you, Christina, for allowing me to go for a few minutes over as well.
Gautam, I wondered do you have a site plan that shows proposed and existing buildings together? I think all of the renderings were beautiful, and I just think kind of looking at a site plan to kind of tease apart what you have and what you're proposing would be really helpful.
Okay. I will go to the appendix and.
Okay, sorry if I missed it. I was.
No, I did not share one next to each other,
Okay.
but I will absolutely put that together. Give me 5 seconds.
Christina, did we get a copy of this presentation?
You should have received a link to a draft
Okay.
copy of this presentation,
Okay.
but I wouldn't use it to refer to slide numbers,
Okay.
as proponents make changes to the presentation right
Absolutely.
up until the last minute.
So I'm just going to share my screen again and let me just share my screen. So I've created a slide that brings the two next to each other.
So we have proposed on the right with kind of the pink colored buildings being proposed.
Yes, that's correct. And so here next to each other, I'll zoom in a little bit more too. Here you can see the annex building has been now replaced with a new green space. We're keeping Ira Allen building and then having these two academic buildings, then starting to frame that green space, but also create this new space over here. And as I continue to make its way, the main quad space stays the same, but we've made some landscape improvements to make it much more a series of micro spaces too. And then the replacement of what is replacement. And then we've also replaced this L building with a new academic building that now completely defines that quad. And then over here, which is the west parking lot, by replacing Edwards Rogers with this new residential building, which is the taller building you saw along Huntington Avenue. That's the existing treehouse. And then here we have a new residential building as well that is now defining this green space called the Grove. It also allows for the pedestrian connection to be now continuous all the way from Huntington towards the southwest corridor as well. Here, this shows you the replacement of the Baker Hall in its own place, but then having a tower, not a tower really, but a taller building massing at that corner that really starts to create much more of a presence along Huntington Avenue over here. And then the last is this addition of the pavilion, which was previously at one point proposed over here. At one point it was over here, then moved to this point, and then we felt this was a much more integrated way of organizing the program too.
And is the Baker Hall replacement also residential?
This is also residential. That's
Okay.
correct. So these are residential. This is an academic building, academic.
Great. Thank you, Gautam.
No problem. And then the other, in the spirit of time, I did not highlight this, but we've also been coordinating with the MWRA on their long-term expansion as well. And so this starts to also take into account with what the plan development is over there to make sure that what we're proposing really also further enhances the overall pedestrian experience.
And then you're also showing the 500 Huntington
That's correct.
development to the
Yes.
northish. Yeah.
Yes, so this is the final, and we're showing this from a coordination standpoint. As you very well know, these are two separate applications, but from an open space framework standpoint, this starts to show you how that all of that starts to connect together. Did I clarify your question, Linda?
Yes, no, that was great. I was really looking for this slide, so I appreciate it.
Could you now zoom into the proposed plan just a little bit more so we could really see? Thank you.
And so we spend a lot of time really also measuring out an existing tree inventory as well of the campus, and then to look at how we can not only add a lot more tree canopy, but then also to look at by eliminating a lot of the parking circulation, how do we start to introduce much more pervious paving because we'll have a lot more pedestrian areas, and to really increase tree canopy and really create these more transition spaces where building and landscape can start to engage more with each other. And this is something that has been missing in the campus currently. And I can continue to keep tracking towards the east so you can see more further in detail. Imagining this to be a place where you could have outdoor classrooms with a pavilion, learning spaces, and then imagining these to be more of a community garden type of a much more intimate space. The other aspect is we've also integrated many rainwater gardens as part of the overall campus. And you've seen certain highlights of those in the ground plane views. But the idea here was to evoke the historic Stony Brook that used to be going through at one point at the time, and to really create a much more modern way of interpreting a greenway with a hydrology system as well that goes along the pipe as well. So to be more intentional and bringing back some of the historic elements.
Got him. While we're still in kind of this, just some clarifying questions, I'm just going to trace this line. Is this the MWRA line, and does it essentially cut through the pike?
It does, and so that is the property line as it exists right now. Wentworth has been a great neighbor in also doing a lot of site improvements that go beyond the Wentworth boundary. And so doing hardscape and surface improvements that improve connectivity have been part of discussions, and we've had coordination with MWRA as well on that. So those aspects would be acceptable. Of course, we're not putting buildings past that line, but surface and site improvements are acceptable and are being coordinated. And
Thank you.
Dave should feel free to correct me if.
Could you talk about how the vehicular circulation is going to work, both for parking areas as well as servicing?
So I'm really glad you asked this question, because that allows me to bring up a slide that we had in our appendix. And so one of the key aspects has been to eliminate vehicular circulation from the core of the campus. One item that was also debated and we received discussion feedback on is we used to have a proposed parking garage at one point. And so we're no longer having a proposed above grade parking garage. We are now having below grade parking. And that below grade parking is below this green space over here, and then this green space over here. And the existing access for that parking garage, currently we do have an existing curb cut for this parking lot here where we get to. We'll either come off of that, or we will come off of Huntington Avenue. And these are being advanced in design and discussed in its overall impacts. We don't exactly know which one we will go into, but VHB is exploring those ideas. Similarly, the parking access for this parking level below the green space would be off of Annunciation Road as well. So really taking the parking access off of the main streets of Parker and making that as pedestrian friendly as possible. So here you can see highlighted are the parking levels below.
This lot comes off of Huntington.
So that is
off of Huntington.
So that is currently the fire station, and Wentworth does not own that. So that access is off of Huntington. That is correct.
Got him. I think. Sorry, Laura.
Let me just ask one more clarifying question. So that is above grade access?
That's correct.
The dash line or below grade?
So the dash line is an above grade access. So you would come off of, and which is an existing curb cut right now, which allows you to have some ADA accessible and visitor spaces here. And that connection above grade would continue to take you to below grade parking below this green space.
And then below grade parking access is through buildings, or is there a separate exterior?
So there will be a ramp that will take you down, which will be over here.
And I did just want to point out, if I might, that this is an 80D only institutional master plan. And so a lot of the details, just taking a little heat off Gotham, because we have not planned those details yet, but I'll shut up now.
Yeah, thank you.
Sometimes that doesn't stop us from asking them, Jennifer.
Could I ask, all... just by extension, I guess I'm wondering if you have a sense of what the number of spaces are in each of these parking areas. Are they meant for general public parking? Are they restricted to faculty and students? Do you have a sense of volume at this point?
At a planning level, and I'd love for Dave to also chime in on this, at a planning level, we're really looking at the amount of spaces that we have and the current users. So that goes beyond just students, staff, and faculty as well. So it's a much broader community that uses these parking lots, and it's looking at how do we make sure that we are meeting their needs. And as Jen said, we haven't gotten to the exact number of what they are, but our primary objective was to just have as few of spaces at the above level, which would be visitor and AD accessible, and push everything else that we need to be below ground. Now, we'll have to add back of house and all of those things that are all going to start to take away space, and not sure where we'll land up with for the parking.
I had one suggestion, maybe for the commissioners here. So Gautam, because it's been about a year since we've seen this, and there have been some changes that have happened in those 11-ish months. This has been super helpful for you to dive in more detail with us, because it's certainly refreshing my memory, and maybe others too. And what we often do is begin to look at these larger IMP projects by system. So looking at, doing a subcommittee with open space framework, and that's what we would focus on, and thinking about pedestrian circulation, how some of the site design concepts and principles are tying into that larger open space, the diagram that you shared, this one, and also the other diagram you shared. And then perhaps also doing a subcommittee where we're focusing more on building massing and the relationship to the neighborhood, the context. And I wonder how the commissioners feel about going forward and doing something like that. I think there's just so much to talk about here. And today was so helpful for me just to kind of get reminded of some of the principles and goals that you have as an institution. What are other thoughts?
I agree with that. I think there's been a lot of work that you've done on this, so we really appreciate that for sure. I think there's some really strong moves, pedestrian moves that I can see in the plan. But it does feel like I need, and I don't know if other people feel this way, that for you to kind of give us some drawings where you pull it back a little bit, where we get some figure ground drawings or things like that, because I'm trying to get around like the exact kind of the design of the pathways and things like that, and just understand what it is that you're creating here in terms of garden rooms versus like quads versus, and that there's a diagram that you can kind of bring us along to understand a little bit better. Because there's a level of detail in here that's making it a little hard for me to see what's the overall concept that's tying this kind of vision plan together. And so I think it would be great to pull this apart. I also would love to just understand more about the building massings and to really understand how they are framing space, not just as what they're doing. I think the perspectives were really helpful, but they, it would be great to do less rigorous and beautiful perspectives and kind of do them from Ruggles and then Huntington Avenue, or to get a better sense of it. I mean, this is a project I'd love to see in a physical model, just because I feel like I'd get it right away when I saw the physical model, but alas, I don't think that's going to be possible. So if we could get like a simple like series of rhino kind of diagrams, like axon diagrams that just showed like whatever's ground plane is like green without any pathway designs, that would be extremely helpful for me. And then kind of major arterial pedestrian kind of passageways, because I think that is an issue that Northeastern has, is that students have to go through, lots of different kind of nooks and crannies to get from one place to the other. I do appreciate the thresholds that you talked about. I think that those thresholds need a lot of help, but it does feel like you're adding a lot of building mass to the campus. And I think it's great that you're changing parking lots into kind of green space. But I would love to just really understand more, what is the structural framework of the pink that's defining what's a void in the campus, and what is it in the bigger picture that's the intent here. So I really understand the thresholds, and I understand that you're improving them, but just as an overall 3D, I'd love to see that more. So I don't know, Linda, if in both sessions we do have an open space discussion, but that there's some kind of understanding of massing to landscape before we start seeing all of the details that I appreciate so much. But I think you've been working for a long time, and I'm a little confused. So, and it probably has nothing to do with you. It's just there's a lot of information here.
So I think, Gautam, this may be sounding like a monthly meeting, but I think in some ways, thinking about today's session as kind of your monthly presentation, and then having commissioners give you some ideas like McYoung just did about what to bring to subcommittee might be the best way forward. Is that also helpful for you, Gautam, as a way to frame some of the content?
Yes, and I totally appreciate the comment on information, because this is an overall campus, and there's a lot of information, a lot of nuances that that have been informing the planning. So
yeah, and I think just because it's been a year, I think we're kind of getting up to speed. So I like McYoung's idea. I mean, maybe the first session is about kind of urban design principles, which gets into the macro level of how does the massing begin to frame open space, and how does the open space become the tissue that connects to the overall neighborhood. And then, maybe we then dive into maybe the finer grain building massing and kind of open space components at maybe a second subcommittee meeting that might help us to at least organize the information.
I think to understand the way in which this, massive development proposal connects to the campus at large would be helpful. I do know, like the central campus, it is designated as an arboretum. You talked about biodiversity and things like that. And so I'm kind of thirsting for the conceptual framework. And so I think that the central campus has, as an arboretum, a conceptual framework. And so how does this, you have lots of trees here. How does this conceptually kind of link into that? I would love to hear more about that as well. So I'm sure this is all information that you have, and I think you need to kind of pull it apart for us to understand better.
One of the other things I'd love to learn more about is I think it's called Wentworth Hall. It always reminds me a little bit of a Tetris shape. And the introduction now of having that welcome building, and really the geometry that you chose for that. And then also learning a little bit more about what happens on the quad side. I think one of the renderings showed a series of kind of platform steps that went up. And so understanding the kind of massing decisions there. And another piece that I also would like to understand better is the pike itself, because I'm kind of intrigued by this idea that the pike is no longer this very orthogonal kind of system pedestrian passageway through that, but that it kind of jigs and jogs as buildings start to front it. And I'd like to understand that and some of those decisions, and just also understand dimensionally how that pike might feel as some of those buildings become quite close to the edges. And then the third piece I'd like to understand is really the Ruggles edge, and appreciated the perspective that you shared, primarily focusing on the commons, but just how that will be enjoyed and used. Can you come in from the corners? Can you only come in from essentially the axis up to 500 Huntington? Where is kind of the playful part of that students feel is theirs and that they can kind of inhabit? So those are three things I'll add to McYoung's thoughts.
That was a great list, Linda, and I agree with much of it, but one edge that I'd really love to understand better is Annunciation Road, and how there's obviously a road there. There's obviously roads that emanate from there into campus and also into the housing development. And there's obviously many ways to connect to the Southwest Corridor Park by zigzagging into those adjacencies. I'm not clear on the approaches here to campus from the Southwest Corridor side, and also the flow of people walking, pedestrians through from that edge of the campus. So if you could come back with a little bit more information, or a little bit more of a visual to that gateway, I think that would be complement your interest in creating more porosity across the entire campus to the various green spaces.
One of the things that I think would be helpful, and it's going to sound like it's detailed information, but really for all of the different green spaces that you're making, where do you enter buildings? So even just a dot where doors are would help sort of understand how some of these spaces might function. And I know that you have the diagram where you show the connectivity between existing green spaces on the campus and off the campus. And that was really helpful. But it would also be helpful to hear from you all what you think the Commons, the Quad, the Grove, the Triangle Park, the Green, the Garden, they're lovely names, but what do you really envision happening in these? And I'm not talking about explicit program as much as, you know, active, passive, both, you know, dining, meeting, some basic ideas about that would be great as well. Because I, you know, modern campuses aren't, you know, they're not axial, they're not, you know, Beaux-Arts, they're much more fluid. And so I'd like to understand that as well. But wow, have you put a lot of information and thinking into this? So it's only because of that that we're able to comment so much on this.
I think we're all
Which
eager
may-
to
you
dig
may-
in,
you-
yeah.
Yeah, and I don't. There are many questions that I could answer today, but I'll table this for a much more organized conversation, because all the questions that you're bringing up about access, location, what are the fronts of buildings, how are these spaces all different, have all had some thought, and I don't want to short answer those, but we do have thinking about behind all of those aspects too.
Great.
Jonathan and Bill, any comments for Gautam and the team? Things you'd like to see in future subcommittees?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think for me, I'll kind of piggyback on something McYoung said. I think really kind of understanding what is the big idea kind of clearly. And I think just to sort of echo the fact that it's been a while, and I think this is the first time I've seen this. But so just understanding, you know, what is the big idea, and then how are these other moves in service of that, just to kind of clarify, and just kind of create structure to kind of get our heads into this. Because otherwise, we can kind of go a little willy-nilly here, going all over the place. So just be able to have something that just organizes how this all works would be helpful to understand your intent.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think Bill might have had to take a call. But Gautam, do you feel like you have enough to go on and totally understand that you all have been thinking about this and helping to organize some of these questions into some themes will help us to
Yes.
catch up a bit?
Yeah, and I think organizing them by themes will help the conversation to be more focused, so we don't get back into a lot of information. And so we'll try to bring it some structure and say, okay, we're going to first focus, Linda, as you said, on the urban design, because we've done all this. What are the big ideas? And we have some big ideas on the urban design diagrams, and then how the massing starts to shape it. So we'll take it, you know, we'll walk you through that journey of thinking too.
We do appreciate all of the hard work you've obviously put into this. So we're looking at, I'm sure you already have a lot of these diagrams we're requesting. So looking forward to a lively conversation as we move forward.
Commissioner Easley, do you mind if I take public testimony?
Sounds great.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raised hand function, and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Allison Pultinas, I see your hand raised. Are you able to unmute yourself?
I hope so.
Oh, Allison, it worked this time. My goodness.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
thank you.
Go ahead.
Just wanted to push forward the idea of shared parking spaces with other institutions to minimize some of the I don't know, it really seems way too much parking, of course, in this whole area. And given what is going to happen at 500 Huntington and what Wentworth is doing now by leasing spaces from Northeastern. And then on the plan, there's Mass Arts surface lot. So just hoping that the institutions could work together and share parking. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. I'm so glad that finally worked.
Yeah, well, I changed devices.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Commissioners, at this time, I see no additional hands raised, so I'm going to close the comment period for the Wentworth IMP.
Thanks, Christina. How do commissioners feel about sending this to a couple more subcommittees?
I think that's the right decision.
Yeah, agreed.
Linda, who's gonna decide? Who's gonna design that? Is Christina designing that or?
Yeah, Mimi and I will work with Christina to figure that out. But I do like the idea of starting at this broader urban design framework. I think that'll help us to just get up to speed a little bit more. It sounds like Gautam is.
What Kathy brought up is really important. It's like maybe to see Gautam how this fits with the campus at large, because it's a big campus impact. So I'm sure you already have that, like how is this piece connected to the rest of the campus?
Yes, we do. I look forward to sharing.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
especially
you.
like the ribbon diagram, so I'd love to see that brought back. That was terrific.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Bye.
Okay. So commissioners, we will move on to the next agenda item, which is White Stadium. This will be the first presentation of the proposed project to the design subcommittee following an introduction at the May 7th monthly meeting. It's my understanding that there are no commissioners present who intend to recuse themselves from deliberations. Is this correct? Great. Hearing no objections, I invite the proponent team to begin presenting whenever they're ready. I believe Tamara and team, you've already been promoted to co-host, so take it away when you're ready.
So I think Christina, before we jump right in, I just want to make sure I provide a little bit of context to the commissioners before we jump in. Thank you so much for taking your time to volunteer your services to the city of Boston and reviewing this project. I do want to share that this project was reviewed at the full commission meeting at the beginning of this month. And this has been part of a really robust community process. There have been numerous meetings, which I'm sure Tamara can list the number. But I do want to share that there's been a lot of focus recently on a series of design workshops that have been taking in community feedback along the way to advance the design in a way that reflects that input. So we had our first design meeting back in April 25th, conducted our second meeting May 8th. Where we focused on program elements of the project. And we're looking forward to our final design meeting, which is coming up on May 30th. There also continue to be numerous meetings held related to transportation, as well as IAG meetings that are going to be focusing on community benefits coming up in June. So this has gone through a really robust community process, and we're delighted to report back to you on some additional detail today. And with that, I'll hand it over to Tamara and the Stantec team.
Thank you, Diana. Hello, everyone. I want to introduce Leah Grossman from our landscape team, as well as Chris Brown, who's going to be pulling up the videos as we get through the presentation. We also have Chris Cochran from our Moody Nolan partnership. They're our stadium expert and our architect of record, and other client representatives on the call as well. We appreciate your time. There's a lot to cover here, so we're going to jump in. Next. So we had our 10-minute intro last time at the beginning, which is hard to cover in 10 minutes, a project of this magnitude. And so we did like take copious notes, and we ended up breaking it into really these two categories of comments, which were about the landscape experience and then about the architecture, kind of simple there. So we're going to jump into the landscape experience. Actually, so I wasn't sure, or we weren't sure how many of you had been able to go and look at the recording if you hadn't been at the first meeting. So I have just a few slides as an overview, which I'm just going to hit really fast. This one in particular was a drawing created by Reed Hildebrand for our first design workshop that Diana just mentioned in the public. And I think it's really helpful just to see the positioning of the stadium in regards to the rest of the playstead, the play fields, this, you know, sort of the valley that it's in, and the views that come from the perimeter, from the overlook, the Long Crouch Woods, the tailgate edge, and then also just the dimension. There's between 300 and 700 feet of woods before, or I'm sorry, like 2,000 feet of woods before you get to JP on one side and Roxbury on the other side. So even though this is a winter view, normally it's very difficult to see much of the stadium at all. So we're going to keep going here, but I think you get at least the context. And then in terms of Olmsted's legacy, certainly this is part of the anti-park, which he envisioned as a place for civic ceremonies, exhibitions, any purpose likely to draw spectators and crowds. So we feel quite comfortable in that zone. And it has been an incredible place for community gatherings, protests, fun, music, all sorts of things, which we are going to try to incorporate some in our project as well as we go forward. Next. And we came up with this Venn diagram, which is sort of these three bubbles, trying to be respectful to Olmsted, respectful as well to the Art Deco Bauhaus building that's there currently, and then the goals of the Franklin Park Action Plan, and where those all cross is sort of the opportunity in this project. Next. And so our team has sort of come up with this language that tries to bridge Bauhaus, Deco, Olmsted, and sort of in soft lines, in color, in warmth. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So just to be, precise, there was more time spent on this at the original introduction. We are representing Boston Unity Soccer Partners, and all of our work limit is within the pink line, which is the West Grandstand. And you can see the list of programs on the left, which are for the soccer team primarily. And then Boston Public Schools is on the right, and they have their own program and are also providing the 8-lane track in the field. In addition to that, we have this wonderful space called the Grove, which really doesn't exist there currently, and is this sort of small to medium scaled space compared to the stadium scale, which we've discussed with the community as a real place for a whole bunch of flexible programming. And because there's food and beverage there, which has never existed in this part of the park, the potential is there to really create a new place as well as renovating an old place. Next. So let's start. So when we talked to you last, we heard some of these questions, tried to show us some of the principles in the Franklin Park Action Plan that we're following. Also, a lot of questions about the approaches and how that experience is changing. We did show you a video coming from the south, and I think that when we analyzed all the comments we heard, really there were no questions about that, right? Because the video kind of did its job and just said, oh, okay, we get this, but how about from the north, and how about from the west, and how about from the overlook? So we're coming back to you with some draft animations to try to show you what's happening there. I hope that those will be helpful. And then how's game day different from a typical day? So we're going to kick it off here. Leah, please.
Great.
Go on.
And so here we're going to highlight just a few of the specific ways that we are aligning with the Franklin Park Action Plan and building off of it. So these are the main principles that came out of the Franklin Park Action Plan. Make connections and activate edges. We, in this project, will be working to improve and clarify the entrances, obviously trying to get a lot of people to the park. We will also be helping to clarify movement by providing and using existing paving to create a continuous bike and pedestrian circuit loop around the stadium, as well as improving paths and trails around the stadium for everyday use. We'll also be amplifying the White Stadium as a magnet destination and also providing additional needs like restrooms, lighting, water fountains, directional informational signage that doesn't exist today. And we'll also be working to unify the park and elevating a consistent standard of care and bringing long-term maintenance services to this area and to the site in a way that hasn't been before. And we'll also be rethinking fences and barriers, removing existing fences and existing barriers, as well as existing dense vegetation, improving views, and working collaboratively with the Parks Department and obviously the whole design team and adjacent design projects that are happening in this area of the park currently, while increasing habitat and diversity. And then I'm just going to talk about two of these more specifically related to circulation. So the first one is showing you the primary loop. And so you can see here, these are just clips right from the Franklin Park Action Plan. And this really supports our goal of bringing vehicles, not bringing vehicles onto the site, keeping this for the majority of the time as a bike and ped loop, using materials that are used throughout Franklin Park, such as asphalt paving.
Hey, Leah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Christina just texted me that we only have 10 minutes for this entire presentation. So I guess we're going to skip through this and just say that there's a lot of detail in the Franklin Park Action Plan that we are following, much of which, though, is not within our scope of work.
Yep. So asphalt paths about 18 feet wide on the primary path, asphalt paths about 12 feet wide on the secondary paths. And then we see how those overlay onto our project. So this is showing a combination of existing paths and how some of our new paths will align to those. And then zooming in really quickly to the Grove, this is the area Tamara was talking about. This area that will have flexible lawn space that can be used every day, but also have a couple tiers and ways that it can be restricted so that you can have ticketed events here and community events and markets and lots of exciting things. And now we're going to show you a few of the ways that you approach the stadium in the proposed design. So we're going to start from the north, and we're going to show you a little bit of design that's not within our scope, but we wanted to be responsive to comments. And so you can see in this image, you see the historic pillars and columns at the north entry of the stadium. Those are planned to be, basically everything in this image is planned to be kept as it is today and preserved. We've included a snip of the Crowley-Cottrell, which is the East Landscape Architecture team. Their design for the entry pillars, really recognizing this as a key entry, but also increasing views into the stadium by adding more permeable and visible fencing. And then we're going to provide a walkthrough of this process, walking up the path and bringing you into the stadium. So I'll shift to that. And you can see the path here is going to be the existing path. You can see a lot of mature historic trees that will be preserved. And then you can, as we get closer, you can start to see the stadium, the new stadium appear. And apologies for the little glitchy over the connection. It's a bit challenging. Then we'll come around and you can start to see the West Grandstand and the new canopy. And then you'll walk through this entry plaza through the historic pillars and the stadium will unfold. And this is shown on a daily basis where folks will be able to use the track and field for exercise on a nice day like today.
Thanks, Leah. Yep. And I promised Liza from the Parks Department that we would mention that there's a lot of work going on outside of our scope of work and conversations with the East Landscape team and Reed Hildebrand about improvements that would be made for these, paved areas and gateways to the park, but that's all outside of our scope. So, and it's also evolving, so it's not quite ready for prime time. Next. So looking at the west, it is, I would say, less of a formal entrance to the park. We could keep going. So you can see what it looks like now. It's one of the few places from outside of the park where you actually get a view of the West Grandstand quite clearly. And again, there's a lot of improvements that will be happening, we think, in the future to this entrance itself, but outside of our scope. Next. And so really the change is in seeing the canopy on top of the building. And then of course, as we start talking about planting plans, there may be, as well, more planting in the foreground of the West Grandstand. Next. So that one we did not do a video because we have one coming up later on when we're talking about the stadium architecture of the West Grandstand. So next, we're gonna, yep, go ahead. Your turn.
Be looking at from the overlook. So a couple existing photos today, and you can see the sort of vast panoramic view over the Playstead. And so we're going to take you on a little tour of the overlook, starting on the south and walking north. And for this one, I'll just say that we know that there's an existing project to renovate the overlook and the Elma Lewis Playhouse, and we are in no way, suggesting anything there. We're just showing the existing conditions. So you can see as you walk around the south, the wide views of the Playstead remain as they are today, and then you just start to get glimpses of the stadium through the trees, and you start to see the activity of the Grove unfold. And we are also working with parks to design the paths that will connect to the overlook. We know it's an ongoing design, so those paths are a little bit tentative at the moment because we want to make sure they align to the future designs for the overlook. And then at this point, we're about to walk over the tunnel and look back over the new Grove design and the stadium. And then at the end here, we're going to turn back and look back over the Playstead and just show that through this project, we're really giving a lot back to this Playstead. We're taking down invasive covered chain link fences and opening up views and providing amenities for folks who use the Playstead every day for sporting events and the like.
Thanks, Leah. Okay, let's keep going. So this last one we showed at the last time. I'm not sure if we should take the time to go through it right now. It's about a minute long. Please raise your hand if you haven't seen it. Commissioners, let me just physically, you have not seen it. You have seen, no.
I think we have several, Tamara, that weren't at the monthly meetings. So
okay, so let's do it then.
It would be useful.
Let's do it. Okay, so this one was really in a response to, community questions about how it would feel from the parking lot near the zoo and the overall Playstead. So when you look above, it seems you see the stadium and the landscape, but when you're here, you're seeing more of the daily birthday parties and gatherings of the community, barbecues. There's the baseball games. There's the overlook in the distance. You can see the just sort of soft rolling hills of Olmsted creating this valley. Then we're looking a bit toward the right. We're just walking through, imagining it's a beautiful day and you're bringing your blanket and your headphones and you're just sitting there listening to music or hanging out with your friends. We actually did a poll at our last public meeting and all sorts of great ideas came up for this space from the community, including just hanging out or movie nights or storytelling, yoga, Tai Chi, dance nights, all of these things that could happen here. Now you're looking at the South Crescent, and the design of it is that on nice days, it opens on both sides and really creates this axial view through, and it has a glass roof. And then as you pivot around, you see the overlook in the distance and just the wide open sense of the Playstead. We have a drink rail area here in front of the South Crescent, which just kind of consolidates that area. We have a team store. We have food and beverage, as I mentioned. And then from the inside of the stadium, you can see again that incredible view through, much more porous than what's there now, which is just a big white wall, solid white wall running around that end. You can see the scoreboard. We've actually shifted it north a bit more so that it is less visible from the playstead. It's only one-sided, so all the digital information is facing away from the playstead, not toward. And then as we fly up like a bird, you can see the canopies, which are providing light shielding at night to the night sky, weather protection, as well as noise containment from the crowd noise. It's one of the very few things that we can do that contains crowd noise. And then you're coming around here toward the West Grandstand. This area of paving here is in the works, again, outside of our limit of work, but is being improved by the other team. And so here you see the West Grandstand with the new canopy, which we're going to talk about next. So I'm going to move to the second part of here, which is how's game day? There's so much to cover. I hope it's okay. It's 6:10. Shall I keep going? Yes. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
do.
Okay. So game day is, you can see here in this image. So there's 20 games a year. It's often in the late afternoon, evening on Saturdays. There's occasional Wednesday night games as well. Otherwise, the playstead and park is just a typical use by the Boston Public Schools and the public. But when it is in game day mode, there is the Grove becomes a private ticketed area that's secure. And that's because it provides a kind of gathering space that, if you went to Gillette Stadium, that would be the parking lot, right? It's the pre and post game area. And what it does is it spreads out some of our transportation and access issues to over longer times. So whether you get there earlier and you stay a little later, that's what this is doing, along with just creating like a great space for activities for kids and music and all that excitement. Next. So I was going to say in that we do have more sort of transportation plans that show what's the difference between a typical day and game day, but I really didn't want to turn this meeting into talking about that. So put them aside and just talking to, just overall kind of what's the difference between game day and regular day. So back to the West Grandstand architecture. We heard the question, obviously, of what's the relationship of the renovation to the 1950 stadium, asked to see the canopy evolution. How does it unveil itself upon arrival? And just general thoughts from the commissioners about what an enigma it is, how you come upon it, and it's a little alien, it's kind of surprising. What is the new experience? So we do have an animation for that, but we wanted to first cover just general conceptual thinking in that regard. So, we just totally embraced this stadium. It's just so interesting. With its white curving walls and its Art Deco details, and it harkens to this interesting time in architectural history. Next. And we want to use that to actually propel us forward into the present, to look at that canopy structure and give it detail and interest and color, and have these warm materials sort of play off of that pure organic geometry. And a lot of that is coming from the sort of Bauhaus textile tradition. And we are also looking at media and how do these canopies and other elements take on light at night, because it's a very nighttime kind of experience for the soccer partners. So we showed this last time. It was really like a clarification of our concept that we have something called the clamshell wall, and now really we're thinking about the clam as a concept for the entire stadium, that it has a sort of white boundary and then these smooth things that are warmer inside it. And then there's sort of all these different ways of penetrating it that are different from that white solid wall that it has right now on the bottom left. Next. And so this is a view of our three-dimensional model where you can see the play of the white walls and the additional wings that we've added to take on that extra program that is actually a sharing of program from Boston Public Schools and us in different wings. And then that sort of interspersing or interweaving of these ribbons of wooden rails and stairs and curvilinear grandstand edges. Next. So we were asked to just provide some elevations, just sort of for clarity and proportion. So you can see on the bottom, the west elevation, on the top, the east. We're looking at, this kind of, again, sort of playing off one and the other, but also trying to set back the new from the old, which is why the elevations don't totally tell the whole story, because they look like they're right on top of each other and they aren't. And then the plans, I don't think I want to go through much of them, but a lot of it is sort of back of house and locker rooms and things that we need, but the public spaces are highlighted here. Ground floor, tunnel club, second floor suites and club, a restaurant, that's the food and beverage crescent, South Crescent. Next. And then as you come up to the next floor on 3, it's an open concourse, really literally open to the sky. And open air, and then on the top is the press box and also seating. There's also some really fun seating up there when you get to the top, and a couple of bars, which would be really fun. So the canopy has evolved. We started on the left with a solid roof with sort of leaf structure of trusses. It ended up being extremely heavy and very, very expensive. And so we've kind of moved on to the one on the right, where it's a lighter fabric roof that we're working on with a canopy manufacturer as a design assist and design build. So we're in that process right now of working on some of these details. And it's a combination of steel truss work and also cables and masts. And so that's where we are right now. And we have sort of changed the shape so that it's more curvilinear on both sides. Next. All right, so here is our last animation. How does it sort of unveil itself? And again, we're looking at this, at late in the afternoon, early evening.
All right, just pulling up this last one.
And we're just going to come around and end at the entrance right next to the South Crescent. So as we said, the paving area, which is existing, which we're showing, will get revised so that it's much less paving. Part of the goal of the Franklin Park Action Plan is to reduce the amount of paving in the park. Some of these trees here are heritage trees, but much of them are also new trees. So we are, in the process of trying to develop that succession planning. And we're just sort of walking to the south. You can see the overlook in the background. And we're looking again at the clamshell wall and how the things that we're doing is sitting behind it. And then we're passing the entrance on the left that's the team entrance that all the women's team will come running in and running out at the beginning and end of the game. Again, more overlook to the left. And here now you see the wing, the southwest wing, where we are repeating some of those elements from the West clamshell, the window types and that Art Deco little cornice that's there. We kept the height down as low as we possibly could so that the views from the overlook that you saw earlier would be able to go right over it and into the stadium. And then this is another view just of that last stadium entrance. So I think that is it.
I can just leave this slide up for questions or flip through.
Right. So
And
thank you very much.
Thank you, Tamara. One thing I do want to note as well for the commissioners is that we did hear from you all as well that you wanted to see a little bit more of the East Grandstand as well. That architecture team continues to do that work and wasn't ready for this subcommittee, but we hope to be able to bring that to you at a later point.
I also wanted to note that we have been joined by Commissioner Morse.
I'm happy to add a few comments. I'm also very curious to get Kathy's thoughts, given her background and expertise. Tomorrow I probably just missed this at the monthly meeting, but I like this analogy with the clam. And the reason I like it is that I also think that the original facade is really terrific because it is so kind of uninteresting in its own way. that the major moments are these bold moments, but it has very little fenestration. And why I like the clam is that you are picking up these moments, I think mainly at entries and also with the warmth of the clamshell on the top that help to really explore that kind of very basic and beautiful architecture, while in my mind not detracting from it. And I think it is really successful. I also think that as the open space component continues to evolve, and I know that is being looked at around 360 degrees around this project, but on the west side, as you were sharing some of those animations, I think that the landscape can also add a really interesting, or could add a really interesting element of color and visual interest. And while I think we just saw the idea of kind of the green canopy tree, I think there might be some opportunities to introduce the clam, not only in the architecture itself, but in the landscape foyer to really bring those pieces together. The one question that I had for today was really about the grove, and it was helpful to see that one illustration that depicted how you might pre-game or post-game there. I wonder day to day whether it will feel like an interesting space or just another lawn panel. And so just something that I started thinking about as you were presenting today, because I think that the idea, this kidney-shaped, very organic shape and plan makes a lot of sense with its twin of the South Crescent, which is kind of an extruded form, right? But I just want to make sure that it has enough visual interest when there isn't an activity there to still really hold its own as an interesting space.
Yeah, so interesting, because we have actually, I think it's great that you even asked that question, because we have been walking that fine line of not marking it as a space per se on a typical day, because the notion that came from the Franklin Park Action Plan was really blur these, right? Free it up so that now it feels like the place that goes all the way through to the stadium, which right now, there's this big fence, there's all these invasives, it feels like a barrier. And so we've been really trying to lightly touch what those edges are. So I'm curious, if I asked you the question back, would you really want it to be called out as a special space, or is it okay that it kind of gets a little bit invisible when there aren't real big activities there?
So this image is a good one to ask that question, because in this image, it feels like a visual foyer, but it doesn't really have a lot of vertical elements, right? That calls it out as a space that's shaped by vegetation or architecture or other things. And I just wonder in the off season whether it will feel just like another lawn panel. Oh, sorry, Bill.
I'm sorry, keep going, sorry.
So just something I think to think about, and I'd love to get other commissioner comments on that topic or others.
Thanks.
Bill, would you like to go next?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So I think there's a missed opportunity here, which is that one of the most masterful things about Olmsted's designs are topography. And if you look at sort of the big gestures that are in Franklin Park related to, you know, the playstead and how one space kind of vertically goes into the other, I think that Linda is kind of picking up on something, which is, yes, there's the notion of having a very light touch, as you have done in this photograph. But when I think about how this building wants to be better integrated into the language of Franklin Park, I'm going to grab a pen. We're allowed to do that, right, Linda? We're allowed to draw.
Go for it.
Okay. So
I couldn't
I'm
unmute
going for
myself
it.
fast enough, Laura. Yes, draw away.
So I kind of wonder if, you know, if this is the public side of this. I have no scale intended whatsoever. And if this is the building, if from this side, hang on, let me change pens. If from this side, you know, you're a person, you kind of look up and it's that ha-ha trick that Olmsted used all the time, right? So that the activity that's here, maybe you see the top of it and maybe you see some activity, but it's also a way to kind of hide what's going on without, I mean, I think having these long views and seeing pavement and this rhythm of like lawn and then pavement and then lawn and then pavement and then activity along the, you know, the entrance for the building, I think that could all be helped and softened using topography in really subtle ways, so that just to really be off. So say that were the, you know, the center line of the berm, and the berm, you know, actually does this. It has a long view in. I'm trying to draw perspective and doing a really horrible job of it. So that this point is this point, right? So that you're really just like your eye is being taken up, and some of that cacophony at the base of the building at the entrance is just softened a little. I'm not trying to hide the building. I'm just trying to make sure that it, like from afar and even as you're closely up, that it all kind of like flows together, you know, up and down. You know, and maybe this can do that too. This can have, that's what this is trying to show, is that there's a high point in the lawn, say here, that will also help if you're down here. I think just straight flat views in are, there's no grace about them. So I'll leave it at that. I know others have their hand up, but I really think that if you should think about the long section line from here back into the park. So I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you. I hope someone got a screenshot of that. But I'd also like to give Leah just a moment to respond, if that's okay, because we have been working a little bit on berms before.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's definitely something we thought about in some of our early designs. And when we had a sort of redesign moment, working with Reed Hildebrand and gathering the action plan principles that came out of the action plan, one of the big guiding things was really creating this open view and blending the playstead and having a nice, elegant meeting to the stadium. And so the idea of interrupting it with topography sort of counteracted that idea of having this continuity. But I do hear you in integrating some subtle topography changes. And I will say that it's hard to see from the model, but to the left on this screen is the overlook. And when they actually built the
Yep.
stadium in the 40s, they created really sharp topography and cut off some of Olmsted's sweeping gradual changes. And so over here on the left side, we will be softening that edge a little bit and be able to blend the topography from the overlook back into the Grove area. But it is a good idea about, you know, cutting that long section and seeing how topography could subtly impact these views. So that's definitely something we can.
Even a foot would do. If you go out to
Mhm.
Wellesley College, which is the campus that the Olmsted brothers did, in all of their courtyards, they have that just very slight pillowing, and wherever you stand, you can only see the path that your feet are on. It's so subtle, you would never know it. So I'm not talking about anything really dramatic, but I think it does help with the experience within the front yard, if you will, of the stadium. So I would just encourage it. I mean, honestly, it was the lookout that gave me this idea. It was like, wait a minute, something really special is going on there. And shouldn't that thinking topographically be extended to this site?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for that comment.
I like this doming idea, if for no other reason that it helps this space that's meant for activities and events help to shed rainwater.
I was going to say, it's
in
also,
a
it
better
happens
way.
to be a puddle. We're always talking about
Yes.
the puddling there.
Yes.
And if we
Yes.
did the reverse, which I know we're thinking of, but haven't documented here, that's our thought, Linda. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Catherine?
Thank you. Can you all go to the bird eye view that overlooks the crescent and the grove, if possible? I do appreciate Commissioner Solano and Commissioner Easley about essentially some of the flatness that's existing right now in that area. There's a lot of paths, and of course, the thing that keeps coming for me is transportation. There's a lot of paths, but how people discover those paths, how they connect to those paths, definitely a grave concern for me. But I'm curious in terms of, given the current condition of White Stadium and that back half where shot put, discus, and other track and field events happen, and given this new take on it, what is the estimated square footage now of that area that it kind of extends into Playstead Field, if you have that number?
Our lease area is about 60,000 square feet right there, I believe. But once we put the South Crescent in it, it's less, Catherine. So we could follow up with that actual number.
Okay. And what is it like currently as is? What is the current square footage of that area back there?
The one that's fenced in, you're talking about? Yeah, that is 60,000 square feet, I believe, and please correct me, one of my team members, if I'm wrong.
I think that's roughly accurate. Yeah.
That is correct. So I think, and maybe we can bring this back for you, Commissioner Morris, is the sort of current fence line follows that existing sort of red dash line. So that's currently where the fencing is today, and the area behind it has some of that zone where some of the discus and things are being thrown today. And then there's a concrete wall where the existing walls for the stadium exist, which are kind of following pretty closely where that South Crescent building is. And then you have the stadium behind it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. From a more philosophical question is around how are all of the current projects that are going in and around White Stadium going to have a connection with this center focus? And the reason why I ask is because it was mentioned, right? You have Overlook Ruins and a future site for Elma Lewis that's happening. You have Playstead Field. You have the East Grandstand. It's still not a complete picture. You also have activities that happen at Franklin Park Zoo, but they're all within proximate distance of each other. And given that there's going to be much activity excluding even just the games, but just in general, 365 days a year. But this being the biggest of that all, how are you all incorporating what those other elements are happening that actually tells a more full, comprehensive story for Frederick Olmsted's legacy, but also just in general about this project itself? Just curious how you're thinking about that, if at all.
Diana, do you want it? Because it's all, again, a holistic question.
Yes, and I can jump in, and I think, you know, we're, as an urban design department here, we have been supporting the public facilities team and the Stantec team, and sort of thinking about this comprehensively in partnership with parks and other city departments to think about all of the moving pieces in this area. So I think one of the points I want to make is, I think, you know, there's some gestures in this plan associated with some opportunities with the overlook in that project. I think one of the things I want to share with you is that we're actually looking to maybe reduce some of those pathway connections so that we can allow the overlook project itself to define how it wants to connect to this stadium and growth program. So that's something that, you know, I want to share with you, right, as we continue sort of evolving this project. And then as it relates to the improvements to Playside Field, to some of the action plan recommendations that exist here around, you know, relocating the tennis courts to the Shattuck site, and looking at the bear dens, and looking at the zoo. All of those pieces are being looked at comprehensively, and we're trying to measure very clearly, right, the impacts associated with each of these. So I think it would be great for us to maybe come back and follow up with some additional information on sort of like the status of each of those projects and their intended programs. But I think we're trying to be really intentional, right, about how all these pieces fit together into a broader Franklin Park, and that what is happening here isn't precluding other opportunities elsewhere in the park, that this is sort of both enabling infrastructure and, to Tamara's point, having the lightest touch on that existing fabric to enable the program to exist.
And then I'd add from the soccer partners' perspective that the you know, we've been working with all of the neighborhoods on the transportation planning, especially, and that there will be no personal vehicles allowed on site. And so all of the movement of crowds and folks are coming either from walking, from biking, from the transit locations nearby. There's plenty of bus and also MBTA stations, and then there's satellite parking, which then people go into shuttles. There will be plenty of ADA access, and they will come to the site either from the north side or from the south side on Circuit Drive. And we're working through that with all the different constituencies, just to make sure that we are being responsive to their concerns. And we've got, you know, multiple then approaches to the stadium itself. And most of our, in terms of light touch, most of our transportation changes to the site are done in a temporary way. So the same driveway that is open to complete pedestrians and bikes on a regular day is just coned off to say buses, shuttle buses here, pedestrians on the other side, and we're using that nice wide carriageway that Olmsted originally put in a way just to be able to move people in and out of the place.
Thank you.
Jonathan.
Thank you. And there's so much to talk about. I appreciate the context grounding and sort of the response on the conformance of the action plan. I'd love to actually zoom into the architecture a little bit, and I was wondering if you can go to the diagram of the kind of clamshell concept. I think it's a really compelling, kind of nice way to think about the architecture. And I guess what I'd love to maybe tease out more is I don't know, I guess a better understanding of like how the old and the new actually, where are there intersections or overlaps, or where are there moments where it is not completely, the new is encased by the old, and how does that kind of maybe kind of imply breaking the rule, or what does that start to look like, right? And And I'm even looking here, like you've got the historic clamshell wall, and then you have this new wing wall. I mean, does that new wing wall sort of like an homage to the historic? What does that mean? How do you acknowledge without mimicking, right? So what is that dance, right? And how do you do that? And maybe if that's new, then it is not. Is it not? Is it the shell or is it the clam? Yeah. Just kind of like,
It's the shell there.
it's the shell, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but it's like, but it's new. So how does that? Or maybe this, I mean, I guess the shell doesn't necessarily imply new versus old, but you know what I'm kind of getting at. It's kind of thinking through some of these moments where the diagram has to be challenged a little bit, right? And just sort of teasing out what that starts to mean for the architectural kind of language. And I guess further down, there's that sort of section perspective comparison, which
Yes.
is helpful to sort of illustrate the kind of dramatic difference in the sort of architecture of the canopy. I guess maybe what I'm hoping to maybe also see is, again, this seems to be kind of cut closer to the midsection, maybe another couple of views like these. Because I think these views are helpful to sort of see that sort of old versus new. Maybe it's what I'm thinking about or wanting is maybe a dumber diagram that sort of shows a sectional view of old versus new, right? Just so we can sort of see what's there now, how's this new thing layering on that, and where are these moments of kind of intersection, or where are these moments where you kind of go through the old to get to the new, and what does that look and feel like, right? Just really kind of just better teasing that out as kind of as part of that narrative in terms of again the diagram. But I think, yeah, I mean, again, there's so much we can kind of go and talk about in a lot of ways, but I think this moment does feel really kind of important. And again, I guess to what extent does that language also then imply an attitude about the auxiliary buildings, like the restaurants off to the side, right? I mean, this kind of makes sense for this key kind of crescendo moment here, but what happens further along the expanse here?
Absolutely.
So yeah,
Yep.
I mean, hopefully it's not asking too much, but just kind of really looking at that sectionally, even just orthogonally without kind of being dropped in perspective to kind of understand how these things come together, what happens when you kind of move through them as an experience. And then yeah, like that new clamshell wall, like what is the sort of relationship to the Bauhaus without sort of well, also highlighting the sort of primacy of the historic wall.
Great questions. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm going to try to answer them here or just say thanks for the questions and we'll come
Yeah, I
back
don't know
and try
either.
to answer them. Because we do definitely have thoughts, and we've tried in some of the videos to show those moments, right, where there's that gap between the clamshell wall and the wing, and that seems like a real moment there that we need to dig into a little more.
Yeah.
Or when you come around from the south and you enter the stadium between the south crescent and the wing, and we've purposely put a stair there,
Yeah.
right, to the left, so that you could see that thickness of that wall and pass around it and then change the material to the wood. So we definitely have a lot of thoughts about that we could kind of, as you say, be poked a bit more about it and make sure that we're clear in our
maybe
treatment.
Totally. Maybe that's a plug for renderings in addition to videos. Sometimes it's hard to know what is that key moment. I mean, again, for what we're talking about, one meeting can go to the other, but I think for like understanding these key moments, sometimes just either pausing the video or just having that moment be more fully rendered and invested in to sort of showcase what you're trying to communicate.
Wonderful. Will do.
Thank you, Jonathan. Kathy? I think we've got you on mute, Kathy. Oh,
Sorry.
great.
And forgive me if I have a coughing fit in the middle of this. I want to say that I'm very excited about this project. I'm delighted that at least one of the grandstands has been preserved in order to express that Art Deco history. I think it's along with the new concepts that you're introducing here, I think just begin to show the evolution of this space as a play space, as a stadium, as a need or a place for changing uses within the city and the neighborhood. So I think that I'm delighted by that. I do think there are some things I don't understand, and I'm with Jonathan on that, and really not to a level of detail that you need to necessarily go into, but I think it's his caution about the relationship of new elements like the clamshell that relate to the historic elements, but distinguishing between old and new enough so that it's understood. You can read the distinction or the differences. I think are going to be important in helping to at least not just tell a story of continuity, but tell a story also of change and layering. I'm interested a little bit in, I understand we have two segments of landscape here, that one that the school department is responsible for, one grandstand and a portion of the landscape. I'm curious about what the maintenance plan actually is. Who's responsible here for, ultimately it's a singular entity that's going to be in charge of making sure that all of this is ultimately managed in the same fashion, I assume. But I guess that wasn't clear to me in the way that this has been presented in two segments or two responsible parties for the development. But I do think that one of the other the other questions I have, while I think this is going to be a great amenity for the neighborhood and for the majority of time for school department activities and also the neighborhood in general for recreational purposes, I'm unclear which portions of at least what you've shown of the West Grandstand and the other infrastructure that you're building, team store and things like that, which pieces of that will be open and available to, and at what times? I mean, in other words, will all of that be closed up space when there isn't a team game time, or are there other uses for those spaces that might also continue to engage the community at either in off season or in the times in which the professional team is not playing? So there's a couple of things that I just think relate more to how the public will engage when there isn't a big activity or event going on. And one little note, by the way, just sorry to be a little literally all over the place, but I'm curious about the canopy as well, and a little bit more detail on how the new version attaches to the stadium itself, and how you see that connecting. It seemed that there was more structure in the more different structures between what you had initially proposed and what you're suggesting now. And I guess I'm curious how it affects the actual grandstand structure, and how it will anchor into, how it will be supported based on what I can see here. And then finally, what's the lighting plan here? Where is it? Or how will it be? It appears that many of the poles that are on the outside of the west gate are gone. So what's the plan? And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, that's a lot. I think I will jump into at least I think we hear everything you've said and really love it. It's giving us a lot of room for thought in terms of the place for changing use and continuity versus change and layering. Heard that loud and clear. The maintenance question that's one of the parts of this project that is so wonderful, is that Boston Unity Soccer Partners brings the maintenance contract for this stadium, the entire stadium. So that takes a big load off of the city of Boston. So that's number one. One of the things you asked about was how is it going to feel, right, on an everyday? And there's been a lot of discussion about with the Boston Public Schools about pretty much opening the entire West Grandstand except for those private spaces that are, our team locker rooms and other things, which really need to be locked. But otherwise, being able to use the concourse, being able to have mentorship programs with Boston School students who can go up in the press box and figure out how these things work. There's been a lot of back and forth on, making sure that all the different amenities have a use with the Boston Public Schools as well as the soccer team. So for example, the team store could be selling merchandise for the Boston Public Schools while they're selling it for Boston Unity. So those kinds of conversations have been happening, so that it really does seem like, a holistic place on an average day, and not, oh, this place is shuttered and that place is open. The lighting plan, we are working on it. And we could probably give you an update next time we see you. We're just in the process of trying to figure out exactly how, what size and how many light poles we'll need to light the field and the stadium at night. And I'm not sure if you're asking about as well, maybe decorative lighting for the clamshell wall or other things, but I understood you to be asking more about those the big poles that exist. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Bill.
Thank you, Linda. And thank you, Tamara. Could you pull back the canopy evolution slide that you just had on the screen? So as I look at the end line, they call it the end line, and that's some temporary bleachers, I assume. And I apologize if you covered this before, then we'll make it really quick. But is the idea that both end lines are going to be filled with bleachers at various times?
On the 20 games a year, there will be south and north end line seating, which is temporary. That's what you're seeing in the far distance over there.
Yes. Yes.
Yep. And then underneath the West Grandstand on the ground level is actually mobile seating, which it's not technically retractable, but it just slides in under the West Grandstand so that the track can be used on a normal day.
So the question I have is how are you going to balance the issue of it being a stadium with seating on all four sides, and how is it going to balance that with its sense of community openness? And you may not have answers to that, but that's the issue to me that is pretty challenging. And maybe tomorrow you have a 2-minute answer to that question. I don't know.
I guess I'm not exactly sure what you're getting at, Bill, but the times that those end line seats are there is only for the 20 games. And it really is because we want to create an outdoor room, right? With seating in the round around the stadium. And anyone who is coming into the stadium at that point has a ticket. So at the various entrances, there will be your usual, if you go to any kind of game like this, right? A temporary tents that cover the security apparatus, so nobody's bringing in anything detrimental, and then the ticketing, and then you go past that and into the stadium, and that's happening at various points all around the stadium. So the public in that case would use the the various other paths around the stadium, sort of move around it but not through it necessarily. Does that answer your question?
And is it easy to ensure that the end line bleachers are removed after each of those 20 games, or what happens where people start leaving them there for several weeks on end, which creates a barrier to its sense of being part of the park?
I think our bigger problem is how fast can we get them out of there, right? It's like the pressure is for BPS to use this every day and the stadium to be open every day. I believe it's from 7 a.m. now until 9 or 10 at night. And so aside from these game days, those all need to be moved and out of the way. And certainly the BPS, students need that area to be able to use the track and field. So that's called the D zone outside between the field and the loop of the track, those two Ds. And there's plenty of uses put in there, like long jump and all these other things, and they need that space. So it will not be, posing a problem being there on a long-term basis.
Okay.
Diana, I don't know if you wanted to respond to that or add some other comment.
I do, and I think, Bill, one of the things that we've been working thoughtfully through here is ensuring, given that this is not just a soccer stadium, but really a multi-use facility that is really centered on BPS students, that this is done in a timely fashion, right, after those games. So there's sort of like setting up time and tear down time that we're factoring into the sort of usable and programmable space that would be available to students in the community prior to those games. So, and those are things that we'll continue to codify within the lease agreements, within the cooperation agreement, that are all being worked out right now as part of the negotiations of this project. So this is sort of front and center because this is not just a soccer stadium. This is a BPS multi-use facility that needs to serve the track program, needs to serve BPS students, on a daily basis, and more importantly, also serve the neighboring communities. So we've been working really closely with the team, and given the operations and maintenance commitments the team has made, we feel confident that those would be taken down in a timely manner to restore the stadium to its non-game day condition.
Thank you.
I had a similar question as Bill, although I didn't realize that temporary seating was also on the south. But will they be stored on site for those 20 games? No.
Doesn't
Okay.
look like it, no,
Okay.
Linda. The east and west will be, but
Right.
not the north and south.
Got it. I don't see any other commissioner hands. Christina, I see that we might have one community hand. Should we see if we have some comments from the public?
I would be happy to. I'm going to stop your screen sharing, Tamara. Great. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raised hand function, and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Karen, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I am. Yes,
Great.
I
Go
am.
ahead.
Am I the only member of the public here to speak?
You are the only member who has their hand up at the moment.
Okay. Hi, my name is Karen Monty-Brodek. I'm president of the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. I really appreciate the work that this commission does as you find and review and you see these civic projects. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of challenges in this project, and I don't think all of that is clear. So I wanted to lay out a few of those things. I think it is interesting, the terminology of this project being a light touch project when 95% of the stadium will be demolished with this project effectively. And there's a lot of challenges about that. So I wanted to mention one of the key decisions that was made was to take this public stadium and essentially allow for a 30-year lease to a private nonprofit use, which is something that is managed by our state constitution. And this is public land, as you all know, and it has a tremendous value to the communities around it. And so I wanted to just mention a couple of these things, and I'll be submitting a letter so that you guys can understand all of the ins and outs of what I'm talking about. To date, not one neighborhood group or park group has endorsed this project. So I do agree there's been a lot of back and forth with some neighborhoods, but this was effectively announced as a project with a 30-year lease, again, which doesn't follow Article 97 and a couple other of those very key environmental protection laws. There's no MIPA that's going to be done on this process, and there's a letter from the Landmarks Commission signed by 16 commissioners pointing out their serious concerns about looking at just one half of an historic stadium. At the last meeting I was at, they were not able to tell me the height of the building. They weren't able to tell me key things that any neighborhood, any community, and you need to know. Everyone believes White Stadium needs to be renovated, no question. What we would like is that to be a fully public renovation. The great news is the mayor has put $50 million of public funds towards this project. And that is something that we'd all like to work to make sure that this stadium can be renovated for the public. There is an ongoing lawsuit about these two issues. There was a request for a temporary restraining order, which was denied because not enough, I guess, bad had happened yet. But effectively, there are some very key issues and key community leaders, including Dr. Jean McGuire, founder of Metco, and others that have expressed serious concerns about this, because ultimately, the key design decision here is whether or not this is public. And I think a lot of folks are saying, well, it's just 20 games, but we're talking about the change of the nature of the use and design and the character of Franklin Park. This is not in line with the Franklin Park Action Plan. The community talked about improving the park for existing uses, not bringing in another professional team. And Frederick Law Olmsted explicitly said that Franklin Park should not be used for adult professional sports because of the impact it could have on the neighborhoods. These neighborhoods, many of them that I have been working with so closely on this and other things going on around Franklin Park, have talked about the fact that many of the communities that live around Franklin Park did not move there by choice. In fact, they were redlined. This were the neighborhoods that many people could live, and they adopted the park. They took care of the park when the city and others abandoned it. And today, they are not being asked if this project is the one that they like. They're being told that this project on balance is good and everyone should like it. And it is not the way that I believe we do planning today. I believe that that was the way planning was done in the 50s and 60s. Today, I'd like to think that we worked more collaboratively. There are major concerns about the transportation plan because effectively, this is a desire to shoehorn in a really great thing, a women's soccer team. I played women's soccer. I love women's soccer. I'd love to see it somewhere in Boston, but I like doing that with collaborative conversations with communities and the environmental justice neighborhoods. I will wrap up. The
Okay,
environmental
respectfully, we're
justice
over time.
Okay, if there, and I just didn't sound like there was any other member of the public. Okay, okay, I'll let June, my staff, speak. Thank you.
Thank you. June, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yep. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Hi, yeah, my name is Jin Lee. I'm a staff member at Admiral Necklace Conservancy. Thank you for this presentation. I just had a couple questions about lighting as well. I'm wondering how would that be powered? I'm wondering I'm assuming there's going to be some heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems placed, and I'm wondering where that will be kind of going in all that landscape design. I'm wondering where, because I know some stadiums need a lot of power, and I know a lot of them use solar energy for renewable. And I did see that y'all have a US LEED certification on your presentation. So I'd love to learn more about the sustainability about this building. Thank you.
Thank you, June. Morgan, I can't imagine that you're here to provide public testimony. Are you here to respond to anything?
I'd just like to make a clarification in response to a few of the assertions that Karen made earlier. Would like to say that the city is very confident in our approach to this project, that we are going through the appropriate and legally required reviews. The lawsuit that was mentioned, actually, the injunction was denied on the basis that their arguments were unlikely to be successful in court. I'm happy to share that legal documentation from the judge if you're interested. We also, I know that community process is not the purview of this commission, but also want to say that we feel very confident and proud of the community process that we've gone through to date. And if the commission finds it appropriate, I'd be happy to provide an update on that at a future time.
Thanks, Morgan. Commissioners, with that, I'll turn it back to you to discuss next steps. I'm not seeing any new hands raised at this time.
Thank you, Christina. I think that closes our public comment part of the subcommittee. Thank you all for bringing some of these issues to our attention. Commissioners, I think that we've raised a couple of things that we'd like Tamara and Leah's team to bring back to us, both in terms of the architecture, the open space, a couple of questions that Kathy had noted about lighting as well. How are you all feeling about having another subcommittee versus sending this back to the full commission?
Are you asking me, Linda?
No.
Oh, I was like, okay.
Thank you.
Like, wow, what a question.
Thank you.
I don't know how to answer that.
Thanks for your patience, Tamara and Leah, as we just have a quick internal discussion about next steps. Commissioner, thoughts on next steps?
Yeah,
Go.
no, please go.
I was gonna say that the struggle I'm having is that this is incomplete. And so it's a hard decision to make when the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing here. I think the comments that are made are absolutely valid, but it's still an incomplete picture to know that if we're gonna move it along with only knowing 50%, is that in the best interest of what we signed up to do in these roles here? And I'm not sure if I can agree with that right now, just given that we only have 50% of the picture.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Diana, I know you mentioned during the discussion that the work is certainly happening on the east. It wasn't ready for tonight. I don't know what their timeline looks like to answer Commissioner Morris's question.
Absolutely. We're working towards having those materials ready for the May 30th public meeting. So we're in short order. It just wasn't ready in time for this presentation tonight. But we're committed to sort of providing that. And I think also, this is a really complex project, and we're trying to also understand the sort of jurisdiction of what's subject to Article 80 versus not. We understand you need to see the entire picture, but there are some sort of jurisdictional boundaries here that we're also navigating in terms of, what's in the lease line is what's subject to BCDC, but everything outside of that is not. So again, we still want to bring that though, because we understand this is one unified stadium, and we're committed to providing you with that information. So you can certainly attend the public meeting as a constituent, and we certainly hope to bring that back to you all as part of this process.
Thanks, Diana.
Yeah, I might maybe sort of agree with Catherine's comment there. I think there's a lot. I think there's obviously a lot with this project. I think the comments we provided today were largely kind of focused on things that can be can and should be reacted to that we'd love to sort of see. And I guess in terms of timing of that, I guess I would acknowledge that it probably could make some sense to understand how some of these other conversations transpire, and to the extent that those may have any influence on the project. So while I imagine that you might be ready to respond to some of these comments we made in short order, I do think there could be time that could have that the public meeting, the other processes at play here, and if that has an influence on the ultimate design, it could be good to see how that all comes back to us here. Yeah.
Jonathan, am I hearing from you and Catherine that you would advocate for an additional subcommittee?
I think we asked questions that were productive, that were addressed, and probably need some some conversations. So yes, I'm advocating for another subcommittee meeting. And I don't know if Laura's on it. I think she asked some questions as well too that probably warrant more conversation.
Do we have a consensus about another subcommittee, commissioners? I see some heads nodding. All right. Tamara, Leah, I think that we would love to see you again at subcommittee. I think it'll be great to have some of the information from the May 30th public meeting presented, and just some of the other questions about site and massing and historic preservation addressed as well. Tamara, I saw you taking great notes, so I'm certain you've jotted all that down. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you for all the insightful comments.
Yeah, great.
We'll come back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, that concludes the meeting agenda this evening. Proponents, commissioners, member of the public, we thank you for your time. Unless there are any other comments from the commissioners, I'm going to end the meeting.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Diana.
Bye-bye.